years. We had a lot of mutual interests.
Would that be culture, music, politics?
Culture, politics mainly political interests, including his prime concern, also a major concern of mine, Middle East, but much broader questions of justice, freedom, oppression, which he was much involved in. Me too, and our paths often crossed. And then it was just a close personal friendship. Actually, he had arranged, we've never talked about this much, but back in the, I guess it must have been around 20 years ago or 25 years ago, he began arranging with meetings between high officials in the Palestine Liberation Organization when they were visiting New York, meetings with friends of his who were sympathetic to the Palestinians, critical of the PLO, to see if there could be some constructive discussion to suggest ways in which they could change what they're doing to achieve results which would make more sense for the people involved. And I was involved in some of those meetings.
Anything come out of it?
No. I have to say no.
What do you think of the Geneva Accord that they've been working on?
Current Geneva Accord?
Yes, exactly.
Well, it offers
better than
some
they
real
have.
hope.
Yeah.
It's a great improvement over the Camp David proposals, which were completely unacceptable.
To the Palestinians?
Yeah, they made no sense.
You know, Jimmy Carter said that today on a recent appearance on this program.
Oh, really? Well, he's quite right. And as soon as you look at a map of what was proposed, you see that it was absolutely unacceptable. I mean, it broke up the, there's a lot of talk about percentages and so on. That didn't mean a thing. If you looked at the actual maps that were discussed, which unfortunately were not easily available in the United States, they should have been, but they weren't. As soon as you look at the maps, you see that what in effect it did was break the West Bank into 3 pretty separate cantons.
So these were not contiguous territories?
Well, they were technically contiguous, but only way around the edges. If you wanted to go from you know, Bethlehem to Ramallah, you were going to have to go way to the east. And so there were 3 effectively separated territories, all, again, effectively separated from a little part of East Jerusalem, which is the traditional center of Palestinian cultural, educational, commercial existence. And it was a kind of a Bantustan situation, as was discussed in Israel at the time. And of course, it was all separated from Gaza. But, you know, actually the meaning of that was described by President Barak's chief negotiator, Shlomo Ben-Ami.
Right. And later, foreign minister.
Yeah, he was the negotiator at Camp David, and he was an academic, and shortly before he entered the government, he wrote a book about it in Hebrew, in which he said the goal of the whole Oslo process, then leading to this, would be what he called a permanent neo-colonial dependency. The Palestinians would be a neo-colonial, effectively modern colonial dependency permanently. And in fact, that's what the proposal was. And it couldn't work. However, after the Camp David proposals broke down, this is now September 2000, August, September 2000, that's when the current Intifada started. But negotiations continued, and they made some progress. In January 2001, there were meetings in Taba, which led to informal meetings, but with fairly high-level people on both sides. And they made considerable progress towards a more acceptable 2-state settlement.
But it was too late then because the Israelis were into their election.
They were into the election campaign, and Prime Minister Barak canceled the meetings, and after Sharon was elected and the violence began to escalate, they were never picked up. Everyone assumed, I assumed too, that they were never continued. However, it turns out now we have learned that contacts did continue. And the Geneva Accords that you mentioned are the results of these continuing contacts. And they make considerable progress beyond the Taba.
The Geneva Accords hammered out by Yossi Beilin and other Israelis in over 2 years with Palestinians who I'm not sure in part may have been members of the Palestinian Authority or not. I don't know.
Some had been, but all are close to it. Yeah. I mean, they're as close to the center of Palestinian don't have a state, so they have an informal authority. But they were as close to the central part of it as the Israeli negotiators were to the Israeli government. In fact, probably closer. You know.
Your friend, the late Edward Said, didn't have much to say good about Yasser Arafat.
No. Nor did I.
Nor do you.
No. In fact, we were very much in accord about this for a long time. Some of
a real disservice to the Palestinians.
Well, it's a... I don't think one can say that exactly.
Why is that?
Because he's also a symbol. Without him as a symbol of
I'm not making a statement. I'm asking.
Yeah.
So,
look, he remained a symbol of Palestinian nationality, struggle, refusal to submit. That's important.
Right.
I mean, whatever you may think of him personally, just serving the role of enabling people to resist harsh oppression, probable destruction, which was the goal. That's significant, whatever you think about his particular decisions and choices. And of those, they're a mixture. So I wouldn't, I mean, I was always harshly critical. You look at what I wrote back in the 60s, it was critical. Nevertheless, there's a strain which was on the right track. So in the mid-1970s, Arafat did recognize that the settlement would have to be a two-state political settlement. There was a Security Council resolution debated in January 1976, which was supported by the PLO. They publicly supported it, which called for a two-state settlement on the international border with full recognition of Israel's rights to peace and security and so on and so forth. That was a good resolution. Unfortunately, the U.S. vetoed it. And then there was a process for a number of years in which Arafat, in his complicated way, of which there's much to criticize, nevertheless, one theme that ran through it was trying to press for such a settlement. The reason Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982 was to try to prevent these efforts at diplomacy to continue. In fact, they said so publicly. It was an invasion to secure the West Bank.
The invasion of Lebanon.
Yeah, which is where the PLO was sort of based.
Right.
And they wanted to destroy it was called, by the High Command, in fact, a war for the West Bank. We have to stop the negotiations and the diplomacy, which was becoming an embarrassment. And let's get back to terror. They're happier with that. And this continued for some years. And it's a sort of a mixture of corruption, terror, violence, bad judgment, and a continuing drive towards what has to be, what almost the entire world recognized must be some kind of political settlement roughly along the international border with two states side by side.
Roughly along the 63 borders.
67 borders. Roughly, with some modifications.
Yeah. How do you...
Actually, I should add, and we should be willing to recognize this, the main reason this has not taken place is that the U.S. has blocked it for 30 years, unilaterally.
How so?
Well, as I said, it vetoed the 1976 resolution. Right. It vetoed another Security Council resolution in 1980. It has,
at the behest of the Israelis or independently?
No, well, you know, we could argue about exactly why,
right.
But they did it. Israel didn't like it, but they could never have blocked it if the U.S. hadn't backed it. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, much more importantly, the U.S. provided the means, the diplomatic, military, and economic support, which enabled Israel to continue slowly integrating the territories effectively within Israel. The big settlement programs, the infrastructure programs, and they can't do it without U.S. support, and that's true right this minute.
They could not?
They can't do it without U.S. support, and they know it.
U.S. support in terms of in the international community, or U.S. support at the UN, for example?
At every level.
In other words, you're suggesting that without the U.S., the overlooming possible veto at the Security Council or in some other way, that there would be some kind of what?
No, that would be blocked.
Some kind of
they need the economic
some
support.
Kind of